Hello, welcome to another episode of The Wandering Prodigal. I know it's been a couple of weeks since the last time I posted anything, but given the fact of all the protests that we've been seeing based on the racism, black people, uh, they've been receiving abuses from police brutality, and just overall from the general populace of white people. And I felt that it was going to be better for me to be able to step back and give them a chance to be able to sound off and give them their voice. And as a result, I've reached out to a couple of friends that I thought would be able to help me out. Today is going to be the first episode with my friend Demi. I met her a couple of years ago on a group in Facebook, and she's a young black woman, has her bachelor's, and she's predominantly grown up in a white culture, but she's also felt the pressure of being a black woman. And so I reached out to her a couple of weeks ago, to ask her if she'd be interested in being interviewed. She did reply back. She felt that she was not emotionally ready to be able to talk on camera, but she really wanted to be able to respond, give her insight, her openness. And so I do wanted to spend some time to welcome her and welcome what she has to say. So today's video will be more of a narrative. I felt that getting any type of video footage of the protests or anything like that was going to be not really wise from some of the warnings I've been hearing. I guess that there's been a number of people that have been sought out that from those that have been watching YouTube videos, and they decided that it was going to be safer for them to not be on video. So I decided to be able to acknowledge that and to respect their privacy, so that no one will be sought after for being protesting or being present at the protests. And so this will be me narrating Demi's words. I hope that I can actually convey what she has written, what her heart is. But I want you to be able to listen and to be able to understand this is the perspective of someone who lives in that community, who deals with all of the stuff that all blacks tend to experience. And so I want to welcome you to The Wandering Prodigal with Demi. Can you describe a situation in which you were treated differently? I grew up in the middle of a very white state, attending very white churches. In most of the spaces I was in growing up, I was one of only a handful of black people or people of color. Like I can count on many of one hand. It wasn't until adulthood when I had the chance to reflect on things and I realized that I've always felt a bit different. I always thought it was because I was socially awkward or shy. It wasn't until I got to college that I had a distinct feeling that people just didn't trust me. At the time, I thought it was just because I was new to the area. I've never had a black teacher or a black doctor in my entire life, and I have a bachelor's degree. There is a very real correlation between the self-esteem of black students and having black teachers in the medical system in the United States. Is one of the worst for black and minority people, especially black women. A black woman is 4 times more likely to die in childbirth than a white woman. I've had at least 4 guys tell me they don't want to date me because I am black. A few years ago, I was working for a company doing dog walking in which I had access to people's homes. One woman, a white woman, had antique caricatured figurines of black people in her kitchen. I was extremely uncomfortable. Microaggressions. Being treated like I was an exception. One of the good ones because I was raised in white spaces and white churches. When I was younger, I used to shave my head, and a woman told me, "Your people have such nice, lovely heads." Family friends told a story as an example of how racist their great grandfather wasn't, because he told a black man he was a credit to his race. I've had innumerable people ask me if they could touch my hair or touch it without asking, as if my body was public property. Or people ask why I don't straighten my hair, as if white Western beauty standards are the only ones that matter. My father killed himself when he was 22. Black men have some of the highest rates of suicide in the United States. Not a situation where I was treated poorly, but something that has obviously had an effect on my life and is an outcome of racism. More recently, since 2016 election, more specifically, I've noticed an increase of attention while shopping, store employees, or security hovering. I've always had a certain level of social anxiety that makes going out in public difficult. 2016 greatly exacerbated this issue. Once I graduated high school, I started making yearly visits to see my family on the East Coast. When I visit them, we socialize in predominantly black spaces, and it's like a breath of fresh air. When I return to a majority white spaces, I can quite obviously feel the difference. I feel markedly less safe. The 2016 election was a massive eye-opener for me. I realized that people I know personally, Christian people, can welcome me into their homes with open arms and smile to my face, while voting for an openly racist, sexist, fascist piece of human excrement that would be more than happy to take away my rights as a minority and a woman, or just as happily see me dead, which we've seen further evidence of with current events, police brutality, protest, and pandemic. And those people are just the people I know personally. How have the latest events, including the protests, made you feel? It may come as a surprise, but I'm actually feeling hopeful. I've seen a lot more activity involving white people taking it upon themselves to examine how we got to this point as a country and begin to educate themselves on systemic racism. Not only that, but seeing the corporate response makes me feel as though the tide is turning in our favor a bit more. I know corporations are just paying lip service, and I do not trust them, nor am I interested in indulging them because of their stances. However, I know they're following the money, and if the money is in the hands of the majority, they clearly believe the majority view is in favor of BLM and LGBTQ rights. From my perspective, it's an indication of societal leaning. But what I don't want to see is a bunch of lip service with no real change. One can only hope. That said, I do have a fairly small circle of friends, and most of them are already people who were looking to do what they could to improve the world. I hope this change is happening on a broader scale, but overall, as I said, and as time goes on, the work on the part of the protesting gives me hope. It's funny, well, not funny. When all of this started, I had several friends ask me how I was handling everything. I think people were very disturbed and scared on the edge. I felt a bit of that, but really, for Black people in America, this is nothing new. We all know I feel no more or less threatened than I did before. Now I'm just hopeful that this stuff will finally start to change. Do you have any information about the protests that we are not hearing correctly from the press? I personally do not. I haven't been attending protests because I'm currently quarantining with people who are in the high-risk group of COVID-19, and I'm not willing to put their lives at risk. I follow a lot of protesters on Twitter, however, and I'm inclined to believe their accounts. I haven't followed mainstream media accounts of the protests other than what I've seen refuted on Twitter. In what ways are whites being racist to you? There are three things in particular that I absolutely despise when I see them. White people denying that systemic racism exists. White people using anecdotal evidence to absolve themselves from being a part of the problem. And three, white people making it about themselves, white savior complex. What white people need to do predominantly right now is to sit down, shut up, and listen. Self-educate. Believe and elevate minority voices that are actually experiencing the issues white people are so quick to discount or debate. There are innumerable books, documentaries, and other resources people can use to more deeply understand these issues. For goodness sake, utilize them before you open your mouth. Can you describe if or how white nationalism or supremacy is involved? Our entire country was built on white supremacy. It's sewn into the fabric of our society. It's more American than apple pie. It's so ingrained in our society, we don't even see it unless we are trained to see it. It's like growing up in a city that's always had smog, and you don't know that the sky can be any other shade than blue-gray, because you've never seen it. It started with colonization, slavery, manifest destiny, and has continued because people in power are still able to capitalize off of it one way or another. White evangelical Christianity, what I grew up in, has an extensive history of racism and xenophobia. The white supremacy of this country is predominantly propped up by those very people, either through denial or just outright racism. In the area I grew up in, they taught me to see myself as an exception, see other black people as lesser. Not just other black people, but any other people group that do not fit in with our in-group. Islamophobia was also a huge part of that. I have them to thank for many of my continuing mental health issues. Conservative white Christian Americans see themselves as the people chosen by God, God's children. That's their narrative, and they're sticking to it. How could you get anything but elitism and supremacy come of that perspective? And if someone says in contrary to those beliefs, they discredit it without even considering it. But it's not just inside of white evangelical Christianity either. White people outside of that are hesitant to recognize their own privilege because it means they have to do something about it. If it doesn't exist, they have no responsibility. And hey, it's not their fault, right? They never personally owned slaves, and their life hasn't been cake either. So what are all these minorities complaining about? We're all in the same playing field, right? People need to first recognize that privilege, in fact, exists. Then examine why. Everyone in this country also needs to examine why they feel the way they feel about certain things. Who benefits from those feelings and beliefs? As a white person, even if you're not a white supremacist, you still benefit from it because it's foundational and to the operation of our society. In today's society, we had thought we had gotten a grip of racism. But can you describe what we have done wrong? Can you describe what is the real depth of racism? I think the ideas of post-racial society was fed to us by the powers that be as a means of avoiding the issues. And the fact is, it worked for a very long time. I grew up in the 90s. I was taught that everything's fine. We're all equal now. People are poor because of poor personal responsibility. People become criminals because they are bad people. It's all lies. Lies meant to comfort and control the middle classes and keep them working to fill the pockets of the 1%. Keep them scared so they stay away from the lower class and never challenge the lies they've been fed. The real depth of racism is that we're easier to control when we're divided and in a capitalist system. Someone always has to be a loser, and it always has to be their own fault. What would you like us as white people to know or to learn from what you have experienced? People need to understand that this world is not what they've been led to believe it. Every institution, every social construct, every tradition, everything needs to be challenged, boiled down to its most basic elements, and if they're no longer beneficial, throw them out. It's not easy. Our education system has been failing to properly educate us for decades, and the level of self-education necessary is hard. It's a lifelong pursuit, and it's hard to know where to start. But it has to be done. People need to understand the history of this country and that it's not something to be proud of. What was done to the indigenous people, black people, immigrants, any people group considered non-white in the history of this country has been abhorrent. And it continues in so many forms today. I'd also like people to realize that we're all more alike than we are dissimilar. Every human, regardless of our externalities. We all basically want the same things, and most things considered would make the same decisions given the same circumstances. I know there are outliers and malignant sociopaths, etc. do exist, but they're not the majority. People don't choose to become homeless or drug addicts or refugees because of lack of personal responsibility. Sometimes it's a lack of access to resources or the way a person's biology or chemistry is configured or circumstances that threaten their lives. People make decisions based on what makes them the most sense to them, and people looking in from the outside need to understand that. It doesn't excuse everyone's choices, but people need to realize that if better alternatives are offered, most people will take advantage of them. But the main point being, we're all human and none of us are better than the other on the basis of things we cannot choose. As a society, and this is tied so strongly into religion, it's not even funny, we need to stop seeing ourselves and each other as intrinsically bad. As if we wouldn't make the right choices given the opportunity unless we're punished into it from the time we can crawl. Studies have shown that this is not the case. Humans are initially inclined to be moral and empathetic, much like other animals, more than narcissistic and self-serving. We're meant to operate as a collective organism. We're better together, and diversity only strengthens us. But we need leadership that reinforces that. The sooner we understand this and move away from making everything punitive, the better. There have been so many examples of police brutality getting wildly out of hand over small infractions, and I think the concept of sin nature is strongly tied to that. I only recently recognized how the world can be different, and it's thanks to the posts people made with the imagination to envision what that could look like. I've known that the world is as it isn't how it should be. But I hadn't gotten to the point where I had a concept of what it could be until someone else gave an example. That's how entrenched we are in this concept of punishment, but only for us regular people, never the elites. So much so that we ignore all the other social aspects of the choices people make, and there's no room for grace. The incredible irony of that being that it's one of the Christianities, and we're a Christian nation, right? Strongest selling points. How would you sum up the efforts that have been done? Have they been doing any good? What would you like to be seen changed? I don't think state and federal government responses to the protests have been enough. We need to defund police, defund the military, abolish ICE, reconstruct our penal system, forgive student loan debt, introduce universal basic health or income, revolutionize our education system, introduce Medicaid for all, make housing a universal right, decriminalize drugs, among so many, many, many other things. If we're going to build a better world long term. I'm not optimistic about these things. Global warming is still a looming disaster, and we've done nothing to address it. Inequality is a massive issue. We haven't even addressed this pandemic, and threats of larger, more difficult to manage pandemics loom on the horizon. I do see incremental changes taking place as a result of these protests, and that does make me feel hopeful. It's not enough, but it's something. Moving at a snail's pace is not going to get us where we need to be, though. At this point, I'm mostly hoping to build a society in which we can all be a little bit more comfortable as we face our inevitable end as a species. I want to thank Demi for her attention and for the time she has taken to be able to respond and to be able to express her heart. And I would hope her well, and I'd hope that you have a chance to be able to listen to her and to be able to respond and respect where she's at. Over the next few weeks, especially as the protests continue on, I want to be able to respect them. I'm going to be reaching out to some others and try to see who wants to be able to express their own words. I know that many are experiencing high emotions through this time, which is very understandable. But if you like these videos, I hope you would subscribe, hit the like button, and hit subscribe. Also hit those notifications, because I'm going to bring you more content about equality and about where we're going. There's a lot to this. So I want to thank you for watching The Wandering Prodigal. Thank you.